Okay, yeah. Are you sharing the PowerPoint, Maria? Or
I
should I do that?
oh, am I not sharing it? Can
Oh,
everyone
yep,
see?
you are. I can see it now. Oh, that's on me. User error.
No worries.
Okay, yeah. So, today we're going to be talking about fast fashion, like Maria said, and I just wanted to open this up to what you guys think of when you hear the words fast fashion. You can go ahead and unmute yourselves or raise your hand or put it in the chat to make it less chaotic. Okay, so I see a couple of brands in the chat and the words cheap or cheaper, unethical. Yeah, I think these are all really good words to describe what fast fashion is and the context that we're going to be talking about it today. So I think if you just click the next slide, I have some words up here. There's a website that I'm really fond of. It's called ghU. And they describe fast fashion as something as trendy and cheap, like you guys mentioned. But a large part of this comes from how we see like influencer culture. So like a dress from like Topshop or Fashion Nova has like these influencers who market it, and then next thing you know, they're in their like online shop or something. So just incredible turnaround time in terms of like having product, having clothing made to meet our demand in terms of us as a consumer. And the next thing, if you want to click Maria, you can go ahead and do that. So like, why should I care about fast fashion? Why is this such an important topic that we made an internal ghU? And I think a large part of it, at least for me, is environmental. It's environmental and just a concept of human rights because um, a lot of fast fashion is made in really unethical ways, and we'll talk about that in a second. But also, just like the damage it's causing to our planet is incredible. When it comes to, there's like so many aspects of it. There's like water that it takes to make cotton, or if the clothes are made of polyester or other types of oil. And then those clothes are washed and released into the water supply as microfibers. And then, like, we drink that water supply, the chemicals that are used in every single part of this textile process. There's fabric dyes that are polluting water. Um, there's landfill, and that's just like one part, just making the actual product. And the second is what do we do after we're done with our clothes? And that's equally, or if not worse, just because a lot of it ends up in landfills and in the garbage. And that's like not even including some of the conditions that we'll talk about that workers are making these clothes, and how ultimately this comes back to like just being a concept of human rights and equity. And I think all that Globe Med really stands for in terms of like sustainability for our environment, but also making sure that people are treated as humans, not just as machines, I think. Yeah.
So I'm just going to address the question of who is doing or who is propagating fast fashion. So some of the well-known U.S. brands include Fashion Nova, H&M, Gap, Forever 21, and even Guess. And some of the international brands are Mango, which is European, Uniqlo, which is Japanese, Adidas, which is based in Germany, and then Zara, which is Spanish. So all of these companies have been mired with scandals. As you'll see in a couple of minutes, or not just minutes, but like somewhere down the line, Mango was involved in the Rana Plaza televised or like really infamous uh, exposing of fast fashion worker conditions. So just be on the lookout for that. Yeah. And so credit to Jonathan for this, but this is an infographic of grades that are given to brands based on living wages given to workers in these brands. And if you notice, none of them meet the criteria for A or B, which means that all of the brands that are listed on here, like Gucci, Adidas, Amazon, etc., they're all paying their workers 25% or less. And all of them that are ranked E have no evidence for showing living wages being paid to any workers, which is it's surprising that this hasn't even been brought to the public eye yet. So I think we should just be conscious about what we as individuals can do to help hold corporations responsible for this. Yeah.
So like any good GlobeMed ghU, we like to talk about how this issue affects our partner as well in Thailand. So just taking a look at what the fast fashion industry is like in Thailand, it accounts for over 17% of the total GDP of the country. It is the largest manufacturing industry there with over 2,000 active companies, making it a very attractive development prospect for larger fashion companies as they seek to move their factories around the Southeast Asia area just to reduce cost of production. As also the country industrializes and people are getting more wealthy, their consuming patterns are changing. So the growing middle class are buying more clothes and are throwing them away more quickly, especially the most recent generation of Thai teenagers and young adults. A lot of them are only wearing clothing once and then disposing of it. And even when they dispose of it, they're typically not doing it in sustainable ways. It's just going to a landfill rather than to a clothing recycling option or being donated to friends or family. There have been some positive changes in recent years, though. So one point that I have there is Fashion Revolution Day, which is celebrated on April 24th. This is actually the anniversary of the Rana Plaza disaster, which you'll hear more from Sabarish about a little bit later on. But it was this happens every year to sort of bring a spotlight to the issues that are still plaguing the fashion industry with worker exploitation, unsustainable business practices, and just unsustainable growth as well. The picture that I have there on the right is from a Dior fashion show in Bangkok. It was actually a social activism movement that nobody was expecting. A random person just kind of walked up and walked across the stage with that flag. But since it was a fashion show, nobody thought it was weird, and so they didn't get dragged out by security. It says we are all fashion victims, just to highlight that while the people who are being directly affected by this are the workers at the beginning of the process line, there are limitations to how much we as individuals can do. There's saying there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. If there's only so much that any individual can do to combat fast fashion, we are all victims of the industry and its lack of regard for human rights. Thailand is an interesting case study just because they do typically pay a little bit higher wages than some of the other countries in the area, particularly China, Bangladesh, and Vietnam. So as the industry moved towards paying a higher living wage for their workers, Thailand could see more investment from the garment industry just because they already have the policies in place to support their workers a little bit better.
A major issue that fast fashion deals with is child labor. And basically, the International Labor Organization estimates that 170 million children are engaged in child labor, and the majority of it is usually to satisfy demands of countries in Europe, the US, and etc. An example is recruiters in southern India convince parents in impoverished rural areas to send their daughters to spinning mills with promise of good pay and accommodation and schooling and actually a lot of things and monthly wages to their parents. But in reality, they work in really bad conditions and they are paid less than minimum wage, which actually there is no national minimum wage in India, but they're paid much less and they live in appalling conditions. Can you go to the next slide? So children work in all stages of the supply chain in the fashion industry. I've listed some examples here, including production of cotton seeds or harvesting or different parts and putting the garments together, like dyeing them or stitching them if it's more higher end clothing. And generally employers get away with it because the fashion supply chain is really complex. There's no way that you could possibly check on each individual factory, and it becomes very difficult and it's really complex. So the people generally who are on the consumer end generally don't get to know about what's going on this end. And the issue of child labor is not something that is specific to fashion, but it's generally a cause of extreme poverty. I mean, a result of extreme poverty, because where there's extreme poverty, children will be willing to work, and they're also susceptible to be tricked into working in these horrible conditions. Go to the next slide. Since I'm from India, I just wanted to show that this is a kind of graphic that shows each state and how many children are employed between the age of 5 and 14, where the legal working age is actually 16. And you can see just a few bigger blocks that the numbers are like in the 100,000. So it's not a very small problem, it's huge. Can we go to the next slide? And this kind of just shows how child labor is perpetuated in a lot of countries, like India or China, etc. And it generally starts with a family being unable to send their children to school, and the children are hence forced to work. And since they receive no education, they remain in these more or less low-paying jobs. And because of this, girls get married really early, and they end up having kids early, and then now they have a family to support. So, but they may lose their jobs often because their younger workers are preferred. So then it kind of goes back into a cycle that they send their kids to work, and et cetera, et cetera. And so this cycle is something that generally we need to break, and that would only be possible if we can help people get out of poverty.
Right. I'm going to talk a bit about the other inhumane working conditions of workers in the fast fashion industry. So garment factory workers work in atrocious conditions such as long hours, upwards up to 14 to 16-hour work shifts, miserable wages, up to 1/5 of the living wage, and abysmal working conditions with a little to no ventilation, little protection from toxic substances or fibers, poor building infrastructure, and even verbal and physical abuse. There are also many instances of child and forced labor in the fast fashion industry, and there are severe punishments for unionizing or trying to fight against employers. Next slide, please. So over here, I have a graphic of the minimum wage versus the living wage in several countries. The living wage is the wage needed for a person to get access to healthcare, transportation, food, and a bunch of other basic human needs. So as you can see, it's a bunch of places don't pay their workers as much as the living wage. Bangladesh especially is pretty poor in this. And these inhumane scenarios, especially the poor building infrastructure and like the bad work conditions, can lead to, next slide, please. Some pretty awful like scenarios, such as the 2013 Rana Plaza disaster. So in 2013, in Dhaka, Bangladesh, a garment factory collapsed, killing 1,134 workers and injuring more than 2,500. This was caused by terrible building designs and structural problems, which were ignored by the superiors. And what makes this worse is that the day before, a government inspector came and told the buildings to be vacated because he discovered cracks. But the superiors forced the workers to come in anyway the next day. It is thought that pressure from the management could have been avoided with labor unions. And what makes it even a little bit more worse is that the government response to this disaster was pretty bad too. The Bangladeshi government refused help from the UN, and the rescue force was considered just like unprepared volunteers. There were protests and riots, but they're suppressed by the police too. Next slide, please. So we have to ask what's being done. The Rana Plaza disaster faced huge scrutiny internationally. The Accord of Fire and Building Safety forced over 200 firms to meet basic safety standards for factories, and it worked. As of now, over 90% of the big safety measures have been solved. But still, there's effectively no minimum increase in minimum wage, and labor unions are still heavily suppressed. And this is because the Bangladeshi economy, and by extension, fast fashion, benefit from ignoring labor rights. Labor rights, providing labor rights are a cost, and so they all just want profit, and so increasing their costs decreases their profits. To the left here, we have the Who Made My Clothes campaign is an advocacy group that supports like increasing the minimum wage and supporting labor unions. And this quote over here, it just points out the irony of how we live. Next slide.
So obviously there are a lot of negative things associated with fast fashion, but there are a few organizations and coalitions that are working to kind of combat the effects. I have a few of them listed here. One I'm going to go a little bit more into depth about is the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, which is now composed of over 220 organizations, which includes a myriad of different things like retailers, suppliers, trade associations, nonprofits, and brands. And they've developed a tool called the ghU Index, which allows them to evaluate the industry based on certain standards and address inefficiency, resolve damaging practices, and then bring forth environmental and social transparency within the fashion industry. So more specifically, the index enables the ability to measure and score the companies and product sustainability, which allows businesses to make the best decisions regarding the factory workers, the local community, and the environment. They're supposed to use the index, the companies are supposed to use the index to collect information about their own operations and suppliers in order to make the fashion industry more circular. And circular, what I mean by that is defined as clothes, shoes, or accessories that are designed, sourced, produced, and provided with the intention to be used and circulated responsibly and effectively in society for as long as possible in their most valuable form. And then when they're no longer in their most valuable form, they can return to the biosphere in a safe way, like recycling or composting, so they can be repurposed when they're no longer used by humans.